We've come to the heart center, so let's start with type 2. In my personal opinion, type 2 is actually the most interesting and most fascinating of all 9 types when it comes to sexuality. And a lot of the dynamics are actually quite counterintuitive, I would say. Now, as a result of all this complexity, there's much more to be said about type 2 than about any other type. So that also means that this video is going to be much longer than the descriptions for the other types. Now, when we look at clinical psychology, then we see a very strong correlation between type 2 and the histrionic personality disorder or the histrionic personality type. And this histrionic personality disorder is some kind of slightly changed pathology of what we called in the past hysteria or hysteric personality disorder. Now, a key aspect of understanding this histrionic personality disorder is actually linked to sex and sexuality. And one of the diagnostic indications that is used in order to determine if somebody has a histrionic personality disorder or not is that there is some kind of interaction with others that is often characterized by inappropriate, sexually seductive or provocative behavior. Now, that doesn't mean that all twos have this sexually seductive or provocative behavior, but it means that in the root of this character structure, there's an element of that. Now, even the word hysteria is very much linked or closely associated to the sexual function or sexuality, because it was considered to be some kind of disease of the womb. Even the word hysteria comes from the Greek word hystera, and hystera is the womb or the uterus. Now, Hippocrates actually thought that the uterus was especially prone to illness when it was deprived from sex for quite some time. And he also believed that being over-emotional was the direct result of sex deprivation. Now, of course, it was not just Hippocrates who thought that, but it was basically the whole of ancient Egypt, ancient Greece who had the same view on this. And this thought actually continued for quite some time. So basically, as I said, it was already talked about in ancient Egypt. So basically, for some 4,000 years, people have been trying to observe this specific phenomenon. And that means that there is actually quite some useful literature on this topic, and it really helps us in understanding how sex is experienced by people who identify with type 2 or with the histrionic personality type, I would say. And of course, again, it doesn't mean that everybody who identifies with type 2 has a personality disorder. Of course, this is only people who are in the lowest ranges of development. Now, before we are going to analyze the ego fixation and passion of type 2 and how they distort sex and sexuality, I actually want to start by showing that twos are actually full of paradoxes and contradictions. You'll see that they are full of opposites, and these two opposites exist at the same time. So you might actually think that we're talking about type 6, but no. What I'm going to say now is all about type 2. The first paradox or contradiction is what I would call seduction versus inhibition. One of the nicknames of type 2 is the seducer, because they use seduction as a manipulative tool to feel admired, to feel needed, with the final aim of feeling loved. Now, seduction comes very naturally to them. And as a female sexual 2 once said, "With me, get ready for some unsolicited seduction. I will try not to, but I make no promises." And basically this shows that to type 2, seduction comes somehow very automatically. Twos may radiate their sexual energy very openly and publicly, and they may dress in a very sexy or sensual way, but it's still going to be very stylish, and it's very much part of this effective attention-seeking strategy that they have. Now, the aim of their sexual self-presentation is basically to create the image of being a liberated sexual being. I mean, this is especially true for women. Why? Because in Western society, men really claim that they crave a woman who is full of sexual desire and who's completely uninhibited in the bed. So to go back to the way they can dress, for example, the same sexual 2 that I was mentioning said that she likes to wear flowy dresses with nothing underneath, and very often dresses that are like see-through with the right light, because it makes her feel very sexually free, and she really loves this. However, again, it's very important to say that the clothing style of a type 2 is very sensual and sexual, but it's hardly ever going to be provocative or vulgar. It's very seductive and classy normally. Now, in analogy to the histrionic personality type, type 2 is what we could call pseudo-hypersexual. Hypersexuality is about an excessive preoccupation with sex, or what we would call a sex addiction. Now, sex addiction can occur with any of the 9 types when they are at the lower levels. However, type 2 is more inclined to sexualize all non-sexual relations. And there is very often something erotic in the way that they're interacting with other people. So this is why it is called pseudo-hypersexual. So as I already said, the clothing can be very sensual, sometimes even sexual, because it always, in a very subtle way, tries to highlight certain physical features. And sometimes it can even give an exhibitionist impression. And indeed, this type may actually wish very often that others are worshipping their body. So what does this mean concretely? For a female too, quite often they're going to wear something with a very deep cleavage. So when they are bending over, there's even more skin to be seen. Or they may wear a bra, which will be visible under a transparent shirt or something like that. Or they may be wearing a short skirt, leading to even more visible skin, especially when they're sitting down. Or they may like to wear some kind of tightly fitting, sexy dress that really highlights their feminine features. Now, for men, men will try to look very masculine, and very often with some kind of macho connotation, and this can sometimes make it very difficult to distinguish them from a tree. Also, the communication and the behavior may be quite flirtatious and sometimes inappropriately sexually seductive. So in general, we could say that type 2 seems to epitomize some kind of gender stereotypes, and sometimes it's as if they want to behave like a sex symbol. Now, what people in IT would call WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, doesn't apply to type 2. Because very often, although 2s try to present themselves as being sexually uninhibited, very often the opposite is actually true. Because very often they're not really experiencing their own sexual arousal. So contrary to their sexy image, they may have major challenges in being sexually open. I mean, they radiate their sexual energy very openly in public, but once they're in the bedroom, very often they may somehow contain their own sexual energy. In general, of course, the sexual blind 2s are going to be much more inhibited than the sexual dominant 2s. I mean, this inhibition logically will be less obvious for the sexual dominant. But of course, also societal messages and upbringing around sexual values are going to play a major role and enhance this inhibition, of course. The second interesting paradox or contradiction is that for type 2, sex is emotional, but at the same time they're often not emotionally present and they're not attuned to their partner. Now, 2s are in the heart center, so they approach sex really from the emotional angle, and they consider sex to be inseparably linked to love, and it's aimed at creating some kind of emotional connection. So as a result, type 2 is more often interested in sensuality than in sexuality. Sensuality fills the heart, whereas sexual feelings come from a lower part of the body. So twos aspire and they consider themselves to be very loving during sex. And they really hammer on the importance of the emotional connection, where mutual attunement is crucial. And as a female two said, sex is never better than when I show up already satisfied in my heart. However, at the same time, most twos have challenges being emotionally present in the sexual act, because very often they may turn sex into some kind of performance in order to be admired and loved by the partner. And the energy is actually not coming from the heart, because they're too much focused on thinking of how they are being perceived by the partner. Other twos may actually be turned on and they may be energized by an emotional connection. But even there in the sexual act, we may question or argue to what extent they are really connected on an emotional level with the partner. Because very often they're not attuned to the likes and the dislikes of the partner. Very often there is no real tenderness or affection involved, because twos tend to just open the gates of their immense reservoir of sexual energy and really flood their partner. And so very similar like a type 8, for example, they may come on with lots of sexual energy, and it's as if they want to devour their prey somehow. And this, of course, is especially true for the sexual two. But even the sexual blind two may be extremely intense. And some partners may love this intensity, but others may feel too sensitive, or they may easily be intimidated by this. So we could actually say that type 2 is often somehow selfishly intense, and they often do not realize that their partner needs a more tender approach. So again, intensity and open the floodgates of the reservoir of sexual energy is completely different from having an emotional connection. The third paradox is that twos demand intimacy from the partner, but most often don't offer it themselves. And again, I want to make it clear that we're mainly talking at the lower and average levels of development. In the higher levels of development, you're not going to see these paradoxes. Now, so basically related to this emotional and romantic vision of sex and sexuality, twos demand full emotional intimacy from their partner. Twos seek some kind of emotional closeness, which is entirely based on honesty, openness, mutual understanding, acceptance, care, and authenticity. And twos believe that sex is some kind of expression of intimacy. Now, very interestingly is that twos demand intimacy or emotional intimacy from their partner, but they most often don't offer it themselves. Actually, on the contrary, they're very much frightened by the idea of opening up to their partner, and especially in the bedroom. So twos somehow seem to believe that their own intimacy comes from pleasing the partner. And they actually don't see that what they're doing with this pleasing is actually exactly the opposite of true intimacy. And it's a little bit like Anne Gad wrote about type 2 in her book on sex and the Enneagram. She wrote that for type 2, real intimacy is replaced with boasting and inauthentic displays of kindness. So all too often, twos actually display characteristics that are actually the opposite of true intimacy. And actually few twos are able to experience real intimacy in sex. Now, twos are not truly authentic because their pride prevents them from that. So what happens is that twos tend to imitate authenticity. They want to be loved, so they're shape-shifting and pleasing, but they don't show up as their true selves. And that also applies to the sexual act, which is very much some kind of performance in order to be liked by the partner, but it's not an expression of their true inner sexuality, of their true self, of their true sexual desires and fantasies. So twos on these lower and average levels are actually not honest and open to their partner. Because basically very often they may not really express their real erotic needs and desires. And even more, sometimes they may even take a certain pride in not voicing their needs and in their ability of repressing their own sexual needs. So 2s very often can be frightened of being vulnerable, and it's related to the fact that they do not want to surrender or give up control. And of course, also here, this self-preservation 2 is most often going to have the biggest problems in that, because the self-preservation instinct is all about staying into the safety of your own comfort. And on the other hand, the sexual 2 may actually have less problems in openly voicing their fantasies and desires. So the fourth paradox is that 2s tend to overrate and underrate sex at the same time. Basically, sex is simultaneously everything and nothing. Let's go into some more depth about that. First of all, 2s tend to overrate sex. Basically, they believe that sex is a true expression of love. They believe that sexual pleasure is some kind of indication of the state of their relationship. And they believe that if the sexual relationship is good, then the partner will stay because there's a very strong loving bond. But at the same time, they also tend to underrate sex. They devalue sex. And there can be different motivations for that, and not all of the motivations are going to apply to every single 2. And of course, it's also very important to again realize that everything we're talking about is very much into the subconscious. Now, why do they underrate or devalue sex? Well, one option is that 2s actually know that their sexual act is not genuine, that it's very much a performance, and this performance does not involve their true self. And deep inside, they actually understand that they are using sex as some kind of manipulative tool for gaining love, control, and dominance. A second subconscious reasoning for devaluing sex is that as they are unable to be in tune with their own erotic needs and desires, they cannot experience true sexual pleasure. So sex often doesn't really bring anything to them. They do not experience a sexual act as really a pleasureful activity. I mean, they get more pleasure from pleasing the partner, as we'll see, but not from the sexual experience itself. And so very often they're going to say that sex is something they actually don't need and could easily live without. Of course, the sexual dominant 2 is going to be slightly different, because for them sex is very important. A second subconscious reason may be that they have some kind of negative views about sex, or even be averse to it. Because 2s want to please their partner, so they may actually engage into sexual activities that they actually do not want at all. It's only for pleasing the partner, but in reality they may be averse to the actions that they're actually doing. And fourth, in a religious context, sometimes 2s may actually not have sex because they want to please God. The fifth and last paradox I want to mention here is how 2s tend to objectify themselves and then get upset for being perceived as a sex object. So, many 2s, and especially the female ones, want to be seen as some kind of sex goddesses. And they want to create this image of being a sexually liberated being. And especially sexual 2s may really want to be desired and loved for the way that they're radiating their sexual energy. So 2s may actually desire to be perceived as arousing as a porn star. And in the bedroom, they may actually fantasize about even outdoing this porn star. So as a result, some 2s may actually objectify themselves. Now, on top of that, many 2s are not in touch with their own desires. They don't know what really arouses them. And very often, they actually don't really sexually desire the partner. So this makes the comparison with a porn star even bigger, because a porn star is just an actor or an actress who's putting up a performance but is not driven by the desire for the partner. Now, also for type 2, it's not coming from the heart, it's not an emotional thing. It's also not based on a sexual desire for the partner in many cases. So very often the 2 basically allows the partner to use them for their sexual gratification. And making the partner dependent on them can be some kind, or it can give some sense of ego gratification, I would say. Now, finally, the two wants to make sure that the partner is pleased and may actually quite often engage in some kind of activities that the two doesn't want him or herself. So basically, the two allows being used for the sake of the sexual gratification of the partner. And sometimes the two may even suggest something very pornographic or something that's even degrading. But then the two is going to feel irritated and completely confused about having engaged in something they actually didn't like. So although the two in that case may feel very resentful, it's still based on some kind of self-objectification. Now, we all want to feel desired by our partner because this increases our own arousal. But for the partner of a type 2, they very often sense that they're not really sexually desired by their partner. And they also sense that there's some kind of lack of sexual pleasure from the side of the two. So as there is no real emotional or sexual connection, the partner of the two basically ends up using the two quite often just for his or her own sexual gratification. So basically, the two quite often may end up fulfilling the role of a sex object and purely serve the needs of the partner for the sexual gratification of the partner without any real emotional connection being developed during the sexual play. And of course, this is going to lead to quite some resentment and anger from the side of the two. So at the end of the day, the two can be quite upset for being seen and being used as a sex object, but very often they have actually created this situation themselves subconsciously. Now that we have discussed these paradoxes, let's move on and see how the ego, fixation and passion distort the sexual experience for type 2. But let's start with the ego fixation and let's maybe look more specifically at the whole ego gratification. So for type 2, sex is basically a tool for achieving a connection and closeness with the partner and for breaking boundaries between the couple. 2s perceive sex to be an indicator of the emotional state of the relationship. So how does this meaning giving of sex have an impact or affect their sexuality? So how does this ego fixation lay at the core of sex as a tool for ego gratification? Well, type 2 wants to feel loved. So they actually may have sex with someone just with the expectation of getting love in return. So sex can actually be used as some kind of substitute for not feeling valued and loved during the day. So they can even overuse it to feel valuable, desired and loved. So instead of seeking pleasure of the body, emotions and the mind, and instead of using sex as just for its natural functions, 2s may use sex as a way to please the ego, to feel good, to feel loved. And of course, there's many facets to this feeling loved and feeling good. So for example, sex can be a means for feeling indispensable, and it can also alleviate fears of dispensability, because knowing that you are needed and desired does not only feel good, but it also gives you a feeling of being special. And being chosen as a sexual mate and knowing that the partner desires you can actually feel sometimes even more important to them than their own sexual desires. When a 2 sees the partner giving up control during sex, when they see the partner is surrendering to the sexual act, it may make them feel special. So this is why 2s may actually use their seductive qualities to prove they can have whomever they want. And this is going to give them a sense of pride, and this pride will make them feel special, and it's actually going to give them some kind of fake but temporary sense or rush of self-love. So for example, there was a female too who said that when she was 15 or 16 years old, she was in love with this gorgeous medical student who was like 5-6 years older than she was. And the girls of his age were all jealous that this guy was just dating this younger girl. And they were really giving him a hard time. Now for the two, this really gave her a thrill because she knew how desirable she was. And she was taking pride out of the fact that this guy was actually willing to go through this challenge of hearing others mock him, but just for being with her. It really gave her some kind of sense of self-love. Now, twos take pride in giving a lot to the partner. And they want to feel that they can give something that only they can give to the partner. They want to believe that nobody else can give them what they can give. They want to know that they are the cause of the happiness, of the ecstasy of their partner. And they want to know that the partner would not be able to achieve this sense of happiness and ecstasy on his or her own or with somebody else. So for example, when a two hears from an ex-partner that it is so difficult to forget this two, it really feels like cocaine. It really gives them a rush. There was also a self-preservation too who said that she was feeling so good about doing a good deed, for having sex with a virgin, for helping this male virgin lose his virginity. Of course, this feeling completely changed when she found out that he had been lying to her. There is also another part how sex can serve this ego gratification for type 2. Twos are very dominant, and feeling a sense of control and power can gratify the ego. So, twos may actually do anything in bed as long as it is going to make the partner indebted to them. Or a two may actually want to get a virgin who is really hard to get into their bed because it's a power move. By breaking the self-control of the virgin, they prove that they are actually more powerful. Another thing is that the two may actually be promiscuous because it gives a feeling of having power over multiple people. And of course, also withholding sex from a person that you first whipped into a state of frenzied desire also gives you a very strong feeling of power. However, and this is very important to understand, that here we get to the clear cognitive mistake of type 2. If the partner surrenders to orgasm, the partner is basically giving up control to the sexual act, and it does not necessarily mean that the partner is handing control to the partner. Let's move on to the passion of type 2, pride. Now, just like the passion of any other type, also here the passion is going to have a negative impact on the sexual experience. Now, pride basically shows up in several aspects that are related to honesty and openness, and it makes true authenticity and intimacy almost impossible. Let me give some examples. Twos can be very proud of their alleged lack of not having any sexual needs. I mean, they can often not really tell what their sexual needs are, and they can be proud of not being needy. They can also take pride in the repression of their own needs as a way of punishing the partner when they feel somehow rejected by the partner. Twos may also feel very proud of their sexual independence, because very often they can easily get an orgasm through masturbation, but very often they don't get an orgasm through partnered sex. And basically, because of this sense of independence and the inability to relax and surrender, it's very often quite difficult for twos to get an orgasm through partnered sex. And I'm mainly talking about female twos, of course. Another thing is that twos are extremely proud of their pleasing skills because they believe that the partner's orgasm is a direct result of their skills. Now, and here we get to a point which is actually very difficult for twos to accept, but when the partner of a two gets an orgasm, that basically shows the ability of the partner to surrender. And it's not necessarily because of the superb skills or the pleasing skills of the two. Twos actually are really proud of being needed and being sexually indispensable, and they're also proud because they believe that they are the cause of the partner's happiness and orgasm. And also the partner's orgasm can give them actually a feeling of relief because in their perspective this actually shows that they have reached their objective. Now, if there are sexual problems in a relationship, the two may actually proudly leave that relationship and just say that the partner has problems. But in reality, the two is just too proud to be vulnerable, to look at his or her own issues, and to put him or herself at the same level as a partner. And related to that, when the two feels emotionally hurt by the partner, the pride is actually not going to allow for any intimacy. I already mentioned a few times that twos like pleasing, and the ego fixation of type 2 is called flattery. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. If you were to ask a 2, what do you prefer? What gives you more satisfaction? Getting an orgasm or hearing from your partner that they just received the best oral sex ever? There is actually a very high likelihood that the 2 is going to choose the second option. They like to have the feeling or the illusion that they actually enabled their partner to experience something that they had never experienced before, and that it was thanks to the intervention of the 2. So clearly, 2s find more gratification in pleasing their partner than in their own sexual arousal or sexual pleasure. So in other words, sex for 2s is very much about ego gratification and less about sexual gratification. But again, we've seen this applies for just any other type as well. Now, of course, when the 2 is feeling quite confident that the relationship is fine and that he or she is loved and doesn't need to earn the love anymore, then the 2 may actually become a little bit more relaxed and become more interested in the sexual gratification instead of trying to get compliments and praise and love. And this is actually a very interesting dynamic. So also here, let's go into some more detail. Because 2s want to be the source of the happiness of the partner. They feel satisfied by knowing that they are needed and that their partner has a great time thanks to them. This gives them some kind of sense of pride. And it's actually this pride of feeling sexually indispensable and desired that makes them feel sexy and turned on. So it's important to understand that very often 2s feel sexually aroused from knowing how well they perform in bed and not really from the advances made by their partner. And so also the thought that they can have whomever they want is actually a source of pride and also a source of their own arousal. Now, the main purpose of sex for type 2 in the average ranges is to satisfy their partner in order to get love in return. They may even have some kind of romantic thoughts about pleasing and fulfilling the needs of the partner, and at the same time they may have a fear of sexually disappointing their mate. And also here, this is not an absolute truth. We're talking about just general trends. Because again, when the 2 feels loved by the partner, they may not try to please the partner that hard anymore because they know that the love is there. So 2s love giving because it gives them some kind of feeling of being needed, being indispensable, being desired, and all of that means that they are basically loved. So it's very important to understand that twos don't give for the sake of giving. They give and they please in order to get something in return, and what they want to get in return is the feeling of being loved. And of course, in even worse cases, they may also provide sex and not be able to say no just because they're afraid of being rejected. There are a few more peculiarities to this giving the partner a great sexual experience. Now, first of all, in the perception of type 2, the major proof of successfully pleasing the partner can be found in the orgasm. So the orgasm is some kind of measurement of the degree of sexual satisfaction for them. So twos can actually be very much goal-oriented, and the ultimate goal is in having the partner reach an orgasm. But what's very interesting is that twos actually really like to see the face of their partner who is having an orgasm. And it's actually watching this face that gives them an even stronger rush, that gives them even more ego gratification, because they see how the partner is so happy thanks to them. There's a few twos who actually say that they actually want to see the face of their partner who may be watching porn or who may be masturbating, because they actually allow the partner to do this. Of course, there's also other twos who don't want a partner to masturbate or to watch porn out of their own possessiveness. Now, twos tend to be very loving in bed, and they will do anything that it takes in order to bring these highest levels of sexual pleasure to the partner. So even if the partner has difficulties reaching an orgasm, the two is very likely to go on and on until the mission has been accomplished. So some male twos actually said and explained that they would continue thrusting for so long and with such great intensity that it would actually lead to injury. But at the end of the day, they still thought and they really felt that it was totally worth it, because this sacrifice that they were making somehow in their perception showed how committed they were to pleasing their partner. Another interesting peculiarity of this pleasing is how twos want to give maximum sexual pleasure to their partner, and how they really want to cater to all needs and desires of their mate. Twos just have to make the other feel good, and they just have to drive the partner crazy. So twos are very unlikely to say no when their partner is making advances or wants sexual intercourse, and they're also very unlikely to refuse certain sexual acts, even if they are really not into it. Twos can be very adaptable, and they may be willing to do whatever as long as it's going to please the partner, because this also gives some kind of impression as if they are sexually completely uninhibited. So twos want to be fun, creative, generous, expressive, and without any taboos. So interestingly, quite often twos may proactively suggest to their partner to experiment with weird forms of sex, some kind of kinky things. They may even suggest to engage into swinging or threesomes or something like that, as long as this is going to arouse the partner. However, they may not always act upon it, especially if it involves other people, because of their jealousy. And also, if they would hear this kind of suggestion from their partner, that would just kill their self-esteem. Now, still twos are able to get involved in some kind of kinky types of sex. And basically, thanks to their tendency of dissociating to the body, they feel as if they were never involved in any immoral acts. Basically, they feel it was not them, it was just their body. But I will speak about this dissociation a little bit later. There is yet one more peculiarity, or one other aspect of pleasing a partner that may not be super common with twos, but as it does happen from time to time, I still want to mention it. Some twos may actually want to create the impression to their partner that they're having a great time and that their partner is doing an excellent job in pleasing them. But although twos may not always be in touch with their own sexual arousal, some twos, and especially females, may actually fake their orgasm in order to make the partner happy about their own performance. But again, this is not super common. But there is one final thing that I want to elaborate a little bit on with regards to this pleasing the partner, which I think is even more important. In the beginning of this video, I already said that two seek an emotional connection, but they are actually not emotionally involved. Now, in order to know what a partner likes, you really need to be attuned to the partner, and you have to monitor the reactions of the partner. And indeed, twos are very skilled in noticing if the partner likes their performance or not, but somehow they're not always good at listening what the partner actually likes and doesn't like. As a matter of fact, they may be quite insensitive to these needs, but they will give to the partner what they believe or what they feel the partner actually wants. In reality, they very often just project their own needs and desires on the partner, or they may just use the intensity by which they actually would like to be met themselves. And in some cases, this can be perfectly fine, but in some other cases, if the partner is unable to cope with this high level of intensity of the two, it can actually lead to some problems. And here we can see quite a difference between 9s and 2s. Because if a 9 notices that the partner dislikes something, then the 9 is not going to repeat that behavior anymore. If a 2 notices that the partner doesn't like something, then the 2 is still going to repeat it, but just get upset that the partner does not appreciate what the 2 is actually willing to do to them. You may think that all this pleasing and this passionate and mind-blowing sex and opening the floodgates of sexual energy, that this makes type 2 some kind of ideal partner for anybody who wishes to experience all delights of sex and sexuality. For some partners this is indeed true, but not for everybody, because it's a little bit more nuanced. The focus of all of this giving is not selfless as type 2 wants to pretend. In reality, this giving is very selfish, and the aim is very much to be in control over the partner and to be dominating the partner. True sexual interaction requires mutuality. It's all about giving and taking. It's about balancing between the polarities. If there is only giving, then there is no real interaction. The ability to receive is equally important as the ability and the willingness to give. Now, mutuality requires equality, but type 2 actually wants to dominate, but without being perceived as being dominant. And they actually repress their needs as a strategy to be in some kind of superior position. Now, this lack of mutuality can actually be a libido killer for the partner, because it shows that the 2 actually doesn't have a sexual desire for the partner, but the 2 actually just desires to control the partner. Now, some 2s can be extremely good at playing this role of pleaser, but many partners can actually see through it, and it may actually turn them off because of this lack of emotional connection, and this all regardless of the impeccable service that may be rendered to them. But if we dig even deeper, we can actually see that there is a desire for mutuality. The 2s that are not in the upper ranges of development are not altruistic givers. They give to get. And they do not only want to get approval and love, they also want to get their sexual needs and desires somehow met. Now, 2s may refuse the notion of tit for tat or giving to get or quid pro quo, but instead they're going to call it something like creating an environment that is conducive to hopefully having my needs met. Or they may say they're trying to create an environment where my partner will feel open to explore my needs. I admit that I may be missing some nuances here, but to me this sounds like giving to get. I mean, there's an unspoken expectation of reciprocity, and having their unspoken needs met is basically what they want. I mean, the needs should be met either soon or in some kind of not too distant future. Now, in case the sexual mate of the two does not undertake enough effort to deliver as much as sexual pleasure, then the two is somehow going to feel unvalued, undesired, unwanted, underappreciated, and somehow even taken for granted. And this may result in some kind of resentment towards their partner, and the two may actually end up shutting down sexually. As I already explained, twos can be extremely loving and pleasing to their partner in the bedroom. But quite often this comes at a great price for the two, because many twos are not able to truly experience their own sexual arousal, sexual desire, or sexual pleasure. And especially female twos may actually have more problems than other females of other types and in experiencing orgasm through partnered sex. And also very often male twos may actually not be truly present in the sexual act, and they may often forsake their own pleasure if their partner does not reach an orgasm. And if you look at it, it's actually quite tragic for quite some twos, because they are so committed and so dedicated to the pleasure of their partner, but they're not getting any themselves. So the story of sex and sexuality of type 2 may be actually quite sad in many cases. So it really requires us to approach this whole issue with a lot of compassion. So how does a 2 deal with this problem or a challenge of not truly experiencing sexual pleasure? Well, of course, people can react differently to this inability to truly enjoy their own sexual experience. But there is actually 2 main attitudes, I would say. The first option is to just deny and to repress the issue. As a matter of fact, many 2s actually truly believe that they are enjoying sex, and they truly believe that they actually do not need an orgasm. But the reality is that very often they're not really able to assess their own situation, because they don't know what and how others are really experiencing. I mean, compare it with some kind of exotic fruit. If you've never tasted it, you don't really know what you are missing. Now, it would be completely inaccurate to say that 2s are not enjoying sex at all. Of course, they do enjoy sex, but maybe not as strong and maybe not in a similar liberated way as many other types. So 2s will be of the opinion that there is actually no problem in their sex life. And so they're quite unlikely to see a therapist for the lack of any orgasms. They're more likely to see a therapist and say that they feel there is no right connection with a partner. And even if they would see a lack of sexual problem, if they would see this lack of sexual pleasure as a problem for themselves, they're unlikely going to disclose this, just because of the shame that this would bring. So all of this in turn actually leads them to repress their sexual needs and desires even more. Now, a second common reaction is to resent or blame the partner. And this reaction is actually more common among 2s with a strong sexual instinct. Now, as I already mentioned, interestingly, 2s seem to believe that one's orgasm is the result of the efforts of the partner. And they fail to see that an orgasm is the result of one's ability to surrender to the sexual act. So basically, 2s seem to consider that the orgasm of their partner is a proof of their own efforts. So they consider that the orgasm of the partner is a direct result of how much love and care they're showing through their pleasing. But in return, if a 2 is unable to reach an orgasm, they may perceive it as if the partner is not doing what he or she should be doing. They may see it as some kind of lack of love, a lack of commitment, a lack of emotional connection on the side of the partner. They think that the partner got everything and they as a 2 didn't get anything. They didn't get any attention at all. And again, unfortunately, they don't see that the orgasm is the result of their own surrendering and not of the hard work of the partner. Because orgasm is actually, in a certain extent, quite egocentric, right? I mean, you can only get an orgasm if you are fully present in your body and if you are present in your feelings and body sensations. And focusing on what your partner is thinking about you, if you're focusing on what is happening with your partner, then you're quite often doing the opposite, actually. Now, this whole dissatisfaction may lead to resentment towards a partner, but the two is unlikely to actually voice it, because twos want to come across as sweet, nice and pleasing, and openly criticizing a partner does not fit that image. Plus, speaking about one's own needs and desires is often a taboo because they don't want to come across as needy. And on top of that, I mean, for those twos that are actually faking an orgasm, if they would have to say they're faking it, then they would have to be honest, which they don't want, and that again would bring more shame. So as a result, it's much easier for the two to play the martyr and basically pretend not to have any sexual needs. Now, of course, some twos are more direct and can more easily blame their partner quite openly for not being a good lover, for not doing enough, for not connecting, for not caring about the two. And as a result, sometimes the two can become pretty emotional, clingy. They may demand attention and they may actually demand appreciation for their work. And once they move along the line 2.8, they can actually become quite nasty, and very often they can create quite some damage to what is normally a loving and caring relationship. So again, in this context, I want to underline, and this is not only something for type 2 but for everybody, that everyone is responsible for his or her own orgasm. It is not your responsibility to bring your partner to an orgasm, and it is also not your partner's responsibility to bring you to orgasm. Of course, you have to care for each other, you have to help each other, but it is not your responsibility. So how come that twos have such problems truly experiencing sexual pleasure? Well, there's many reasons for it, but I will be elaborating on 5 interlinked reasons. The first one is the dissociation of the body. The second one is shame. The third one is difficulties surrendering. The fourth is the desire to be independent. And the fifth is being out of touch with their own desires and needs. So let's look at each of these 5 in a little bit more detail. Now, first of all, twos are monitoring the thoughts and the emotions and feelings of their partner, but they're not really in touch with their own emotions and their own body. And this brings us to an important element in understanding sexuality of type 2, but especially why it's so difficult for them to truly experience pleasure. In Western philosophy and theology, there's a dualism between the body and the mind. It's as if the two are separate from each other, and this is a big difference with Oriental philosophy. Now, twos seem to relate very well to this duality of body and mind, because many twos perceive their body just to be some kind of vehicle that brings their mind and emotions from point A to point B. Now, many twos perceive their body to be some kind of instrument that they can use to please others, but it's not part of who they are. So they don't see the body of an integral part of who I am. And as a result, they're very much out of touch with their body. They don't really know what their body really likes, and it may be very difficult to sense or enjoy any form of pleasure of the physical body. Now, another aspect of this dissociation of the body is that quite some twos are actually rather desensitized in a similar fashion as type 8 actually. So as a result, many twos need a lot of intensity, a lot of friction, a lot of thrusting in order to reach an orgasm through partnered sex. A second important factor is the core emotion of shame, which twos are unfortunately experiencing very often. Now, shame has been used very successfully by monotheistic religions and by patriarchal ideologies to repress sexuality, and especially the feminine sexuality. So even if we are living in an environment that is somehow sexually liberated, still the legacy and heritage of thousands of years of sexual repression are heavily ingrained in our societal norms and values. Now, clearly shame is a strong libido killer, and as a matter of fact, hysteria is related to shame. I was already speaking about the link between hysteria, the histrionic personality disorder, and type 2, right? So what is hysteria? Hysteria is basically the process where the social pressure of norms and values turn a woman, who is a vessel of massive sexual energy, they turn this woman into a frigid human being who doesn't know what to do with the frustration of all this contained energy. Now, being a compliant type, just like types 1 and 6, and on top having so much shame and being driven by shame, this makes type 2 the most susceptible of all types to this sexually repressed views that sex is something bad or maybe something demonic. So as a result, sexually repressed 2s may actually create some kind of image of spiritual superiority, claiming that they don't have any sexual needs, just like saints. And they actually further strengthen this image by this alleged martyrdom of excessive giving without getting anything in return. So they may present their lack of sexual needs as some kind of virtue of spiritual superiority. But in reality, it's actually the opposite. I mean, they are not driven by some kind of spiritual development. They are really driven by shame. Because if we're looking, I mean, enlightenment is not about not having any needs. Enlightenment is about having a very healthy approach and attitude to your needs. 2s may actually have also erotic dreams and fantasies, which means that they have been pushing their whole erotic and sexual desires and needs into the subconscious. And again, true spiritual development is not about the subconscious, it's really about the supraconscious. Now, of course, the whole cultural and religious background of a person is going to have a major impact, and there's going to be quite some nuances. So we've noticed that 2s in liberal parts of Europe, the US, Canada are actually much less inhibited than 2s that are living in the conservative Bible Belt or most of the Russian-speaking world. But there is another aspect that I still want to talk about: shame. And that is that shame may also lead to some kind of paralyzing fear of being overheard. The self-control which is needed to ensure that no sounds can be overheard by neighbors, family, or children is again a very strong inhibiting force, and it does not allow for any vulnerability or surrendering during sexual play. This brings us to the next and third important contributing factor to why 2s may have difficulties in truly experiencing sexual pleasure. And that is difficulties with vulnerability and surrendering. Now, although type 2 is a hard type, they're actually permanently in their head during sex. They're constantly thinking of how they're going to be perceived, and they're constantly looking for signals that they're trying to analyze to understand what the partner likes about what they're doing and what partner doesn't like about what they are doing. So the sexual act is a little bit like a performance, and they really need to remain in control in order not to be exposed. And being in control means that you're not surrendering. Now, many 2s actually don't like receiving oral sex. I mean, of course, they like the physical sensations of it very, very much. But it's some kind of act that makes them very often feel a little bit at unease. Because again, they're going in their head and they're questioning to themselves immediately: am I shaving well? Is the smell okay? Is the taste okay? Does my partner actually like giving me oral sex? What if I don't come? Oh, it's taking a long time to come. what is my partner going to think and feel if I am not coming? So actually, to a certain extent, there's also a huge sense of pride that doesn't allow them to relax and get an orgasm. And this also relates to the fact that twos are actually quite dominant and controlling, because twos seduce as a manipulative tool of gaining control over the partner. And this dominating requires very strong control, which is actually the complete opposite of being vulnerable, of letting go, of surrendering. And this really refers to this lack of intimacy that I was talking about in the beginning of this video. Now, again about control, during the sexual act, type 2 very often likes to keep control, and this is a way in order not to have to receive. So for example, twos may actually really like performing oral sex on their partner, because that way they are very much in control and they don't need to be in touch with their own arousal. And on top of that, there's a bonus, because oral sex is almost always going to be guaranteed leading to an orgasm of the partner, which is going to be good for the satisfaction, for the ego gratification of type 2. And I would say there is only one real situation where the two in the average ranges of development is going to be able to let go a little bit. And that is when they see that the partner is completely losing him or herself in the sexual act, in this experience. When they perceive that there is no danger of being dominated, when they perceive there is no danger of being called out, when they perceive there is no danger of ending up at the mercy of their partner. And as a matter of fact, twos are very often playing an extremely interesting game. It's like, I want you to desire me, but you can't have me. What does that mean? Quite often, twos subconsciously do everything in order not to get an orgasm. For example, they can close their mouth or push their lips together, because with a closed mouth it's very difficult to get an orgasm. Or another thing is that subconsciously again, they may actually move their pelvis backwards, which makes it very difficult to an orgasm, because the pelvis should actually be relaxed. And also this brings us to the fourth contributing element, which is the desire to be independent. Twos want to do anything to avoid coming across as needy or dependent on the partner. They are fine with meeting the needs of the other, but they don't want others to meet their needs, because they fear that this is going to lead to abandonment. And this also explains why quite some twos are actually very fine with getting their own orgasm through masturbation, because they don't depend on the partner. Twos believe that relying on others for their needs makes them very dependent, and being dependent makes them unlovable. However, also here we see a very, very interesting paradox. From one side, twos do not want to depend on the partner for achieving an orgasm, but from the other side, and at the same time, they may resent the partner for failing to bring them to orgasm. Now, at first sight, it may look a very noble and considerate approach of the two not to want to get an orgasm before the partner does, or forsaking one's own orgasm if the partner doesn't get an orgasm may look like a very nice example of martyrdom, and it all looks very selfless. But the reality is very different. Basically, the two wants the partner to come first, so that their own orgasm is more like payback time, and it doesn't put them in a situation where they are obliged to the partner. They don't want to be indebted to the partner. If the partner has an orgasm, then they are automatically also somehow entitled to have an orgasm, but without being dependent on the partner. So the final reason why some twos may have difficulties in truly experiencing sexual pleasure is something that I spoke about already, but I want to talk about it in more detail and maybe in a more structured and coherent way. And this reason mainly applies to sexual blind twos, and other twos that are living in a society or environment with rather restrictive sexual values. The story for sexual dominant twos in a liberal environment is going to sound quite different. So let me talk a little bit about the fact that twos, although they are very good at meeting the needs of their partner, may often not be in touch with their own libidinal needs and desires. Of course, people with a strong sexual instinct, so twos with a strong sexual instinct in a liberal environment, are most often extremely well in touch with their desires. So this is not going to apply to them. Now, it's interesting that many of these twos actually know when they are attracted to someone or not, but they are not always able to say if they're actually sexually aroused by the person. And on top of that, it's also very hard for them to know what really gives them pleasure. And it's difficult for them to find out until they really experience it. So actually, in order to figure out what arouses them, they would have to be exposed to everything that exists in sex without any boundaries. But this is impossible for them to realize in a relationship where the main concern is how they're being perceived by the partner. So in reality, twos may repress their sexual needs, but in reality they do not have less sexual desire than anybody else. It's just that many of these desires go undetected or are just unexpressed. So it's very often not just that a two doesn't know about the needs, very often they're actually repressing these yearnings in a very subconscious manner, of course. Many of these twos tend to go through life repressing their genuine erotic needs, even if they live in a sex positive and a sexually liberal environment. And some twos, especially the sexual blind ones, pretend they actually don't need much sex, and they may even be proud of that, as I already said. They claim that the only thing they need is some kind of loving connection with their partner. Of course, many sexual dominant twos are going to give a completely different picture and will say they cannot imagine a life without sex. The passion of the two explains why twos are actually not really in touch with their needs, and especially why they have even bigger problems asking for it when they actually know what they want. Twos do not want to come across as needy because they fear that this is going to make them dispensable and ultimately unlovable. So basically, their own sexual needs activate their fear of rejection, and they don't want to be rejected for expressing their sexual desires too eagerly or for an unacceptable sexuality. So as a result, they struggle very hard to ask for a sexual favor, and their pride may actually prevent them from telling the truth to the partner. Instead, they actually often resent the partner for not feeling what they want. So, with regards to sexual desire of the two, we could conclude that they have a relatively low spontaneous sex drive, which means that the sex drive is not really based on their own needs. But on the contrary, they may have a rather high responsive sex drive. So their sex drive is very much based on responding to the arousal of the partner. So what are the consequences of these challenges in experiencing true sexual pleasure, and how do twos meet their sexual needs? Because at the end of the day, twos have sexual needs and desires just like anybody else. Well, in the worst case, twos may actually cut off sex completely. And I'll be speaking about this asexuality or hyposexuality in a few minutes. But basically, twos may actually compensate or replace sex by counting on other bodily pleasures. For example, eating, that's a big one. So it's not about the quality of the food, but more about the quantity of the food. And also even sweet food may be very nice for them. Overeating can serve as some kind of compensation for the lack of love that they're experiencing. But of course, sexual twos, especially in a liberal environment, will prefer leaving their partner than cutting out sex and eating instead. Now, in less radical cases, however, twos will most likely have sex, partnered sex, in order to feel loved, but they're going to masturbate in order to get an orgasm if they're not able to achieve an orgasm through this partnered sex. And of course, this applies mainly to women. Men have less challenges with that because for them orgasm comes more easily. But also sexual dominant twos tend to have less problems with achieving orgasm. Now, another thing here is that due to the desensitization and this inability to surrender, a lot of friction and thrusting is needed. So it's very much this physical intensity that is required, very similar to what we were talking about type 8. So as a result, 8s may actually be using their own hands or a vibrator as they're having sex in order to achieve an orgasm. And also here it's important to see the psychological element of this pride of refusing to let go and this pride of being somehow self-sufficient. But very important here is that indirectly and in a very subtle way, the two, and especially the female two, is actually telling the partner, I don't need you. You will not make me surrender to you. And in case they are resentful to their partner, this message can come across even stronger. Now, the impact of this meta message can be huge for the partner because it basically implies that, look, I actually don't desire you sexually that much. And this can be an immense libido killer for the partner of the two. And it can have long-term impact because it can reduce the self-confidence of the partner of the two. And of course, here we have to look at differentiations between the subtypes, of course, because the sexual two is more likely or more prone to demand the partner just to work a little bit harder. It's also quite common for twos to tell their partner that orgasm is actually not that important, but then they may actually masturbate or use sex toys somehow in hiding. And this may actually be more common for the sexual blind twos. Basically, when a two is engaging in masturbation, and it doesn't apply only for twos but for everybody, basically when you masturbate, you can finally focus entirely on the you can focus your entire attention on your own body, on your feelings, on your sensations, without having to think of how you're being perceived. And on top of that, for some people, and especially the self-preservation and self-preservation twos, masturbation may be preferable because of the practicality of it. It doesn't take forever and it doesn't require a partner reading your mind. But there is a very important point that I want to make with masturbation here, is that when twos masturbate, they actually prove that they do have sexual needs. It proves that their orgasm is actually very important and they do need it. Now, if you think on the basis of what I've been telling now that twos look very favorable at masturbation, you don't get it fully correctly actually. When a two finds out that their partner is masturbating, this can be a real shock for them, because twos pride themselves in being great lovers. So a masturbating partner feels like a rejection. And especially sexual twos may interpret this as some kind of lack of connection. And they may even equate it with infidelity. It's like cheating to them. Still, many twos may not really care if the partner masturbates while watching porn, but they will feel insulted if the partner is masturbating instead of having sex with the two. The only exception here is probably the self-preservation two, because they may actually feel quite relieved that they don't need to do all the work and please their partner all the way to orgasm. In the beginning of this video, I was already speaking about these 5 paradoxes or contradictions that you can find in the sex life or sexuality of a type 2. Now, there is a very similar dynamic that I want to talk about. It may look like a paradox, but actually it's just 2 contradictory types of behavior, 2 modes of sexual behavior and they don't happen at the same time, but the type 2 is basically alternating between them. But I'll make it clear in the next few minutes. So what happens when you're not in touch with your sense of hunger? Either you're going to overeat, and then you will feel bad because your stomach is too full and you can't move anymore, and then you're just going to repeat this whole thing. Or you're very likely to undereat. You're not going to eat enough and you will still feel hungry and you will never really fill up your stomach. So in both cases, it's very unlikely that you will fill your need and that you will catch some kind of state of fulfillment. Well, the same happens with type 2 and sex. They are so much out of tune and out of touch with their own true sexual needs, and at the same time they either overrate and underrate sex without finding a balance, that logically they will end up in a situation where they either overindulge or underindulge in sexual activity. Basically, it's all or nothing. Now, although these are two opposite forms of sexual behavior, they're basically two sides of the same coin. In both cases, 2s are devaluing sex and are neither able to experience true physiological pleasure nor establish a true emotional connection with the partner. So let's look at these two extremes and try to understand when each of these two modes will be activated. Let's start with hypersexuality. Now, hypersexuality is the more academic word or scientific word for overindulging in sex. Hypersexuality replaces the older terms that you may know of nymphomania or satyrisis. Nymphomania was used for women, satyrisis for men. Now, this hypersexuality is some kind of excessive and compulsive preoccupation with sexual urges and fantasies. So basically, it's some kind of addiction to the emotional state that this abundance of sexual contacts can give you. Now, the key to hypersexuality is not in the sexual satisfaction as such, but more in this temporary emotion of happiness that it gives. And as a matter of fact, some of these hypersexual 2s may be promiscuous and have sex with different people, but they are actually not necessarily able to experience orgasms. They are addicted to the ego gratification of feeling desired, valued, indispensable, or loved, but they do not necessarily have a higher than average sex drive. Also, quite some 2s will actually reluctantly admit that during their younger years they were driven by some kind of naive, seductive sexuality, and they were running from one partner to the other, craving to feel loved and always ending up being disappointed. And especially sexual 2s may idealize new partners even more than the other subtypes, and then they got frustrated when the person was actually not matching the ideals they had. Now, not all 2s are promiscuous, of course. I mean, many 2s are not promiscuous at all, but they may still use sex excessively as a way to feel loved. And this intensity of this endless chasing of ego gratification through sex often calms down when the 2 reaches their 30s or 40s, or when they have finally found a person with whom they can establish some kind of stable emotional relationship with. Now, of course, if this relationship is terminated, or if there is a possibility that this stable relationship is going to end, then of course this hypersexual mode may be reinvigorated. So basically, this hypersexual mode will be activated when the 2 is in need of intense ego gratification. And given the long explanations that I've already had about ego gratification, I'm pretty sure that this hypersexual mode is very clear to all of you. Equally interesting is the hyposexual mode, or this underindulging in sex. Now, this is what was called frigidity in the past, but actually it doesn't fully cover the real term, because frigidity goes much wider. It's a much wider phenomenon than just hyposexuality. And if you understand frigidity a little bit better, I really recommend you to read the book Feminine Psychology by Karen Horney, one of the best psychoanalysts ever. Now, in conservative societies that are very religious, that have a sexually repressive approach and that have all these patriarchal values, twos are unlikely to be hypersexual. On the contrary, they may actually turn into hyposexuality to protect themselves, because due to the intensity of all this sexual energy that is inside of them, they are very often afraid of their own sexual feelings. They are afraid that they will not be able to contain their own sexual urges, so they just deal with it by repression and by shutting off completely. Something similar may also happen with twos in what looks like a sexually liberal environment, but where there's still a lot of indirect negative messaging about sex. For example, many twos in the US, Europe, or even the Russian-speaking world, they may look entirely uninhibited, sexually uninhibited from the outside, but below the surface they're still full of negative messages around sex. So these twos may actually have huge sexual desires, but they shut themselves off entirely because they fear losing control over themselves. So also truly sexually liberated twos can actually move into this hyposexual mode. So under what circumstance are they actually going to move from this hypersexuality into the hyposexuality? Well, the short answer is when they feel rejected. Now, I don't want to give an exhaustive list of what is going to make them feel rejected or what is going to trigger this hyposexual mode, but let's look at a few type-specific reasons that may come up. And of course, there may be other reasons why somebody may underindulge in sex that are not related to type at all. I mean, for example, as I already said, sexual repression, but also sleep deprivation. When you have small kids and you have to wake up at night, you just don't feel like having sex very often. So what is going to make them feel rejected? Well, first of all, twos may want to have their needs met, and that's what they actually really want, but they can feel frustrated, hurt, and trapped if this doesn't happen. Deep inside, twos actually do expect reciprocity, but they may not be able to say what exactly they want or how they want their sexual needs to be met. Most often because they don't know themselves. And they have this kind of romantic idea that if people are really tuned to each other, then they really feel what each other's needs are. So when a two's needs are not met, then they may believe that they are somehow not appreciated or taken for granted. And to be clear, it's not that they are upset for not getting an orgasm. I mean, they would like it, but what is more upsetting to them is that, or what is making them really resentful or even angry, is that they perceive that their partner is not putting enough effort in to please them. They feel that this lack of effort from the partner is some kind of sign that the partner is not loving them. It's a sign of a lack of commitment. And if you look at it closer, then twos can actually be a little bit sadistic about it, because they may send a very interesting message. It's like, I want you to please me. I want you to give me an orgasm, but I refuse to surrender to you. So you'll have to try extremely hard in order to really show how much you love me. So this situation where the two perceives that the partner is not doing enough can occur very often when the partner of the two is actually sexual blind or self-preservation dominant, and is quite, let's say, energy efficient and not overly active or assertive, and not really investing too much time in or energy in foreplay to arouse it to, because again, the two believes that his or her arousal is the responsibility of the partner. A similar and related trigger for this hyposexual mode is when the two feels used as a sex object. when the two believes that the partner is only using them for their own physiological gratification, and when the two perceives that the partner is not interested enough in a true emotional connection. And all of this refers to this whole objectification paradox that I talked about in the beginning of the video. So when the two feels not appreciated enough or not loved enough, they're just going to close off. Now let's move to a completely different but still a very common scenario. And this is when the partner of the two feels that the two is just too intense, too much. When the partner is not able to handle the intensity of the two. And for a two, being too much is probably even worse than being not enough. Because when they are too much, this is when the shame is really going to kick in. Twos want to give themselves to the fullest. And they feel rejected when the partner doesn't like this. So any form of criticism, any form of complaint is going to be seen and perceived as a rejection. This completely kills their sex drive, but it may also kill actually their appreciation for their partner. Twos believe that the intensity of their sexual play is a direct correlation of the intensity of their love for their partner. They want to give everything of themselves. They want to do anything that's going to please their partner, and they want to be really impressive. And twos, and even the sexual blind twos, can be extremely intense because, again, they're like this huge reservoir filled with intense sexual energy and emotions. And when they open the gates, all of this energy just floods and it brings out a lot of joy, but it floods out of this reservoir without a clear direction. And this whole energetic discharge just arouses the two even further. So some partners of a two may actually struggle with this. They may feel even threatened or intimidated by this massive intensity. So again, being seen as too intense or too much is again equal to being rejection. And again, this perceived rejection is going to lead to turning off sexual energy. And for a two, this can really be a soul-crushing experience because it really gets to the core of who they are. Now, also, the lack of reciprocity of intensity may be misinterpreted by the two of a partner not caring about them or being perceived as being too much. And this, again, is going to be a basis of resentment. And also this again will lead to a closure of the gates of these reservoirs of sexual energy. Because again, for twos, it's either all or nothing. Either you fully accept my intensity, or you don't like me and you reject me. And also here, this is going to occur very often when the partner is sexual blind, or also with partners who may be fives or sixes, because they are generally a little bit more sensitive. But it can also happen to a partner who, for some kind of medical reasons, may be very sensitive. And the two may intellectually understand that there is a medical reason to this sensitivity, but still the distortion of the emotional center is going to take it personally, and the two is going to process this as a rejection. Now, related to that, when the partner does not reciprocate when the two is initiating, then this is really going to feel as if their soul is being ripped out, because reciprocity is a huge thing for twos. It feels as if their attempts are in vain, as if they're not pleasing enough, as if their intentions are not being appreciated, and as if they're not being desired by their partner. And of course, they may understand that the partner may be tired, that he had a rough day, that she may have a headache from being with the kids all day long. But if this happens too often, it's really going to build up a lot of resentment, and the two may cut out sex altogether. Yet another reason for this underindulging of sex for type 2 is when the partner and the two have different likes and preferences. Twos tend to please their partner by doing what they would like to receive themselves. They project their own desires and needs on the partner, and they think they feel what the partner likes and wants, but basically they're just acting out their own wishes and needs. Now, if the partner doesn't like what the two is doing, then the two is going to believe that there is some kind of lack of compatibility, there is a lack of emotional connection, there is a lack of attunement, and it will be seen as some kind of rejection. Twos may have difficulties understanding that different people just like different things, and it has nothing to do with compatibility. But still, the two may believe that there is something wrong with the partner, or there's something wrong with the connection. Now, rationally, they understand all of this. However, they process their experiences through their heart. And they conclude that this means that the partner doesn't really love them, or that the partner doesn't like their sex. But basically, between liking sex with the two and not liking sex of the two, there is so much in between. There's a wide array of approaches, and 99% of our experiences are somewhere in between. However, the type 2 is actually going to wrongly interpret all of this as some kind of devaluation of the two's intentions. And this is actually a very good example of how we may very often be using the wrong center of intelligence in terms of our judgment. And again, this does not apply to type 2 alone, this applies to all types. Also, when the partner of the two is not able to achieve an orgasm, this may actually turn off sex for the two. Because twos consider that orgasm is a proof of the sexual pleasure of the partner, which is a proof and evidence that the two is doing a good job. So if the partner is not getting an orgasm, the two is actually going to feel sad and especially ashamed, because the two will feel as if they're not really doing enough. They're not doing enough of what it's taking, and it's going to feel as some kind of failure. It's going to feel as if this is a reason for not being lovable. They feel that the partner just has to have an orgasm, if not, something must be missing in the two. So also here, intellectually, they understand that there may be some kind of psychological or medical reason why the partner is not able to achieve an orgasm in a specific situation. But again, because of the distortion of the heart center, they are going to take that as some kind of personal offense. As a result, they may actually blame the partner for not being in love enough, for not being willing to surrender, for not willing to lose him or herself in this pair bond, and for not wanting to have a strong emotional connection. And if this situation repeats itself a little bit too often, then the two may just end having sex at all, because what's the point in having sex if the partner doesn't like it in any case? The last reason I want to mention why twos may actually refer to a hyposexual mode, but maybe still masturbate, is actually a very interesting one. Twos may have limited sexual intercourse with their partner when they do feel loved by their partner. I mean, this sounds completely counterintuitive, but there is actually a very good reason for it. There is a good explanation. Twos often use sex as a tool to feel loved. They use it as a tool to conquer the heart of the partner. But what if you already have conquered the heart of your partner? What if you already are getting the love that you're looking for? I mean, what is the value you can get? What is the gain of trying to conquer a partner who is already conquered? What's the point of sex if you already get this permanent confirmation of being loved? What if your partner fully accepts you and he or she is not going to love you more or less because you have or don't have sex? So basically, it just doesn't pay off to have sex with a partner. Now, this interesting dynamics is something that is very typical for the sexual blind twos, because they can have a very happy marriage without having much sex. Of course, the sexual dominant twos are pretty unlikely to end up in a situation like that, because they believe that marriage without sex is just not possible. So maybe just one more important nuance in order to end this whole discussion on the overindulgence and underindulgence. Underindulging or hyposexuality does not mean that there is no sex at all. Some twos who claim not to have any sexual needs themselves may actually provide what I would call duty sex or humanitarian sex to the partner. And they may somehow belittle the partner a little bit for actually having sexual needs and not being as elevated as the two who does not have any sexual needs. Now, of course, this kind of duty sex is void of any desire. The sexual act is just emotionless and it lacks intimacy. And basically, very often after the partner has achieved orgasm, the two is just going to return back to normal duties. So this is very often going to lead to some kind of resentment on the side of the partner of the two, who may actually be trying to seek a real emotional connection and is not really interested in purely physiological release. But sometimes the two is just not seeing how sex can really be used for creating a true emotional bond. I would like to end this very long video with the differentiation of the subtypes, and I already mentioned the difference in a few instances already, but let's go into some more detail here. Let's start with the sexual two, because this is probably the most stereotypical and the most intense of all twos. Claudia Naranjo actually advised sexual twos to reduce the role of sex in romantic relationships and to enhance the importance of feelings, sensuality, tenderness, and affection. Sexual twos also have this deepest sense of longing and desire for closeness with a person, so they may sometimes even behave in some kind of stalking way. Sexual twos in the industrialized West and those sexual twos with, let's say, more liberal sexual values are actually also very unlikely to stay in a hyposexual mode for a long time. Instead, they prefer just to leave the partner and look for somebody else who's actually going to match their expectations. And the way they are going to be dealing with this sense of rejection is by leaving the partner in a very proud way and without spending much time really trying to talk things through. Sexual twos basically don't want to live a life where the sexual energy is going to be locked up. Now, sexual twos may also be the most demanding of their own orgasm, and their sexual needs may actually take precedence over anything else. Sexual twos may also initiate sex more often, and they may pursue sex more actively than others. So I would say in general that sexual twos tend to overvalue sex much more than others, and they may also have the biggest problems in establishing a truly loving, caring, and mature relationship. Social twos care a lot about the group, so they can often sublimate their sexual needs by directing their attention and energy to a wider community of people. And they can dilute this intensity to several people around them, so they're not going to be flooding their sexual energy on their partner. It's going to be less intense, except if they really want to please their partner very much. Now, another thing is that this scattered energy and active social life may also mean that they have less time and less energy for their sex life. Now, especially as teens, social twos may actually be sexually active because their friends are sexually active. And it's not that they get true sexual gratification out of it. It's not the main thing. Very often they may just want to show off by telling others how good a sex life they have, and they may just want to compare notes with their friends. And all too often this bragging is just aimed at impressing others and convincing themselves that they are actually satisfied, but in reality this is not really the case. They care more about being in the norm. Social twos may also speak more openly about their private sexual relationships, and they may often also share confidential information that should actually normally be kept privately. Another way for type 2 to disperse their sexual energy is through attention-seeking behaviors targeted at a wider audience, such as erotic exhibitionism. And now it's important to get this right. I mean, social twos are not necessarily paraphilic exhibitionistic, right? It's not that they have some kind of compulsion to show their genitals. They're not getting aroused by exposing themselves. No, not at all. It's more about being erotic outgoing. They may dress in a sensual, sexual manner in crowded places in order to somehow seduce the masses, because the attention that they are getting gives them some kind of feeling of being a desired person. Now, in some other cases, sexually liberated social twos may have nude pictures of them published in a magazine or posted on the internet, because this way they can somehow be worshipped by a big audience. Now, of course, this does not mean that all social twos are like that, not at all, because many social twos can actually just be dressed in a very classical style and without even revealing too much of their masculine or feminine features. So we can end this overview with the self-preservation two, which is the counter type. All this seducing, pleasing, dominating, controlling, all of these things require a lot of energy. Now, the self-preservation instinct is all about conserving energy, about not spending more than what is needed. So the self-preservation two is going to try to have his or her needs met, so the need to feel loved, but by using as little energy as needed. So, in order to conquer a potential partner, the self-preservation two may be very active, maybe using lots of energy. They may take whatever it needs. And this active role may be reactivated when there is a fear of losing the partner. But once the self-preservation two is in a stable and loving relationship, then there is not much reason for spending that much energy because, well, the partner is already there and you're already loved. So what does that mean in practice? The self-preservation two is quite unlikely to initiate sex. First of all, because of this alleged lack of own needs, but more importantly, because of the fear of rejection. But on top of that, in a loving relationship, there is nothing to gain from initiating sex with your partner. On the contrary, initiating sex actually creates some kind of expectation of being active in the bedroom. And there's actually no additional love to be gained in this place because, well, if it's just for your physiological release, you can just masturbate. Now, also the pleasing may take more of a passive role. And interestingly, pleasing does not necessarily mean that you have to take an active role. I mean, you do not necessarily have to be on top of your partner and guide the whole process in order to give the partner pleasure. I think we're all familiar with the term passive aggression. Well, I would say type or the self-preservation two does something what I would call passive pleasing or passive control. It's a very useful survival strategy for the self-preservation too, but it can lead to quite some frustration, of course, for the partner. So instead of actively pleasing the partner, the self-preservation too may just want to be with the partner. It's as if the mere fact of being there should be enough. Just the mere presence is already enough. It's a little bit like a child. I mean, just a child just should be loved for being there, not for what the child is doing. So the self-preservation too may just often just want to be cute, be nice and fun to be around, but they may not want to play an adult and active role. Now, the self-preservation too has something immature, but it's not only the self-preservation too. I think that the self-preservation instinct in general has something that's a little bit childlike and immature. Now, this has an impact on sex because if you are playing the role of a child, then you don't have sex. I mean, children don't engage in sex. They should just be accepted for who they are. Now, that being said, self-preservation twos are not entirely passive. I mean, they may be true givers, but only if they feel that they may actually get more love out of it and if they truly like doing what they are doing. but they are actually the least prone to make sacrifices when it's not really necessary. On top of that, self-preservation twos they also don't really feel that it is their duty to put an effort into a sexual relationship when it's not really working out. They believe it's more the fault and the duty of the partner, and it's just the partner who should just do a little bit more. Now, finally, this underindulging of sex that I was talking about, this hyposexual mode, is actually going to be the most frequent among the subtype, just because it requires the least energy. So, we've come to the end of a very long video. I know it was a lot of material, but again, I want to highlight that sexuality and the approach to sex is somehow core of the type structure of type 2. And the other thing is that in our modern day society, type 2 is somehow the ideal of how women are being perceived by men. So many women, even if they're not a type 2, are very often going to adopt some of the particularities and the strategies that we have been describing for type 2.